Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perdichizzi, and thank you for joining me. As always, another week of the college football season is in the books. NFL Week 8 concluding tonight with my New York Giants playing the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Yankees are on Game 3 of the World Series, so there is a lot going on in New York sports. But I wanted to bring you, as always, Monday night, the NFL Draft Report for this week of the college football season. So let's get right into it. Another week where, again, so much to talk about, so much to break down. So let's start right at the quarterback position for the NFL Draft Report for this week. Quinn Ewers bounces back 27 of 37, 288 yards and 3 touchdowns. Texas, a little bit of a scare. They pull out the victory. Cam Ward, Miami beats Florida State handedly. 22 of 35, 208 yards. It wasn't a gaudy statistical performance from Cam Ward, but I do think the interesting thing is some reports starting to surface this over the last couple of days that NFL teams view him as potentially QB1 in this class. First round grade on him. I think that's the momentum that he's been building this year. Again, we take everything with a grain of salt as the year's going on, but I do think it's worth noting that we're starting to see some of those reports that are out there. Gary Nussmeier for LSU. I talked about last week that he was starting to generate some buzz, right? People were talking about him. David Syvertson, very high on him. Dane Brugler, very high on him. This past week, LSU comes up short in that game Saturday night, but he was 25 of 50, 405 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. We saw some of the good. We saw some of the bad. It's the inconsistency that right now is kind of hovering over all of these quarterback prospects, right? Whether it's Garrett Nussmeier, whether it's Carson Beck, whether it's Jalen Milroe. There's been a lot of up and down, a lot of inconsistencies this year from a variety of quarterbacks. The most consistent we've had is Shadu Sanders, who kept that going this week, 25 of 30, 323 yards and 2 touchdowns. And obviously Cam Ward, who I mentioned, those have been the guys with the most consistency this year. At the running back position, I'm going to circle back and give my updated top 5 rankings, but let's just talk about some things that stood out first at each of the positions. At the running back position, Ashton Jeanty, 128 yards, 1 touchdown, continues to really separate himself. And I think before the season started, there might have been a lot of questions at like how the running back room and how the running back tier kind of, stood going into the college football season. But I don't think that's even a debate anymore. I think it's so far Ashton Jeanty at the top. I think the question now becomes, do we have a scenario where we have a top 10 back? Do we have a Bijan Robinson scenario? Do we have, a Christian McCaffrey scenario? Or is it a little bit into the early teens, and we see something like a Jahmyr Gibbs scenario? I think Jeanty has now pushed his way into the mix, that he's just too talented of a player, too impactful in terms of passing and rushing, that I think we're going to see top 10, top 15 be really realistic when it comes to Ashton Jeanty at the next level. I think everyone else kind of fills in after that, and I'll talk about that in a little bit with my updated top 5s. Other running backs that stood out this week, Woody Marks just continues to impress. 94 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns, 5 catches, 48 yards. He is the best I think versatile, multi-purpose back in this draft class, right there after Ashton Jeanty. Obviously, Jeanty, is the best because he's a great receiver and a great runner. But in terms of a guy who's not going to be drafted as a bell cow, a guy who's not going to be drafted in the first 2 rounds, I think Woody Marks could be a guy that surprises, whether he goes round 3, round 4, because I do think there's a scenario where a team looks at him and really sees what he can bring in terms of that versatile skill set. Kind of like when Tennessee drafted Tyjae Spears in the 3rd round. Like a team's going to look at Woody Marks, I think, and see that multi-purpose 3-down skill set, change of pace, committed to what they have, and really be intrigued by Woody Marks. And then another big-time riser this year, we've talked about him a couple times, and that's Caleb Johnson out of Iowa. 109 yards, 3 touchdowns this week, continues to climb up running back boards. Hard to make a list of a top 10 list right now and not have Caleb Johnson in that list, because I just think, what he's done this year has been really impressive. Even though it was a very strong running back class when the season started, I think Caleb Johnson has pushed his way now very much into the mix in that top 10 for sure. At the wide receiver position, Ja'Cory Brooks, we've talked about him a couple times here or there, right? The former Debbie Darling, the former big-time recruit to Alabama, now at Louisville, continuing to make plays week in and week out, 8 catches, 120 yards. I think the question starts to become now is, has he put himself in the mix to potentially be a top 100 guy? Can he go on round 3? I think he's now put himself in that mix. I think he's going to run a blazing 40 time. So when he has that blazing 40 time, he's a vertical shot play guy. Teams are craving that, and teams are looking for that. I think Ja'Cory Brooks has now put himself in the mix to be a top 100 pick in the NFL draft for 2025. Travis Hunter, 9 catches, 153 yards, and 2 touchdowns, continues to show that he's worthy of an overall top 2, top 3, first overall pick, whether he's a wide receiver, whether he's a corner. I think that story is going to be fascinating, but I think he's starting to separate a little bit from Luther Burden for sure, and maybe even for Tet McMillan, because I do think he's a type of guy where he can win in a variety of ways. He can win with his athleticism after the catch. He can win vertically down the field. He doesn't have this great size, but he's got great hand-eye coordination, great ball skills and body control. So there's a lot to like about Travis Hunter's game. I think he has now put himself in the mix to be the first wide receiver taken, especially if there's possibility of him playing some corner as well. And then tight end position, I haven't really talked about him much this year, but he was a guy I brought up a lot last year, and that's Caden Prieskorn out of Ole Miss, 5 catches, 71 yards, and a touchdown. Another really intriguing player who I think, offers a lot in terms of his pass catching ability. He's not a great athlete, but he's a functional athlete, functional pass catcher. I think there's a lot to like about Caden Prieskorn's game. Probably like a round 4, round 5 type pick, but a guy who I think can be a functional blocker and a functional pass catcher. Sometimes those are hard to find in terms of college football. So I think Prieskorn is a guy that NFL teams will be intrigued with somewhere on the day 3 of the 2025 NFL draft. So those are the only things that really stood out this week. So I thought it was a good week. We're like slightly probably through the midway portion. We're like 2 months into the college football season. There was a good opportunity to maybe just kind of reset. We've been talking about rankings a lot, but just kind of reset top 5s from the position, a couple other names in the mix. So the quarterback position right now, where we stand, October 28th, my top 5 quarterbacks look like this. It's number 1 is Shea Sanders out of Colorado. I know some of the concerns that surround him. He doesn't have an elite trait or an elite calling card. He doesn't have top level athleticism. He doesn't have top level arm talent, but he rises to the occasion. He makes big plays. His arm talent's good enough. I think he's got some athleticism around the and when he needs to run, the moment doesn't ever seem too big for him. Yes, I've talked about the character in the comments sometimes to the media. I think that stuff's got to be cleaned up, and you worry about that a little bit if it's a bad team. But there's a lot to like about Shea Sanders' game, the clutch factor, the it factor, rising to the moment, carrying the team on his back, considering they don't have a lot of stuff there. So there's a lot. So Shea Sanders sits there at number 1. Number 2 for me is Cam Ward. I wanted to see, I've liked him for years, from Incarnate Wood to Washington State to now Miami. Wanted to see him improve the decision making, minimize the turnover word he plays, and we saw that. So he sits there right number 2 based on the consistency that we've seen and the growth we've seen from him. Number 3 at the quarterback position is Jalen Milroe out of Alabama. The athleticism, the arm talent to push the ball vertically down the field. We've seen ups and downs, right? We had that great Georgia game. We've had games that he didn't look so great. But if we saw Anthony Richardson go in the top 5, and we've seen how good Jalen Hurts has became, those guys had some question marks about the progression process and stuff like that. Josh Allen had concerns like that. I think there's enough physical traits and enough athletic traits that are intriguing enough with Jalen Milroe. The teams are still going to be intrigued with him. Right now, he's my number 3. Number 4 is Garrett Nussmeier out of LSU. We've been talking a lot about him. I liked him since that opening week game against USC. Again, he's still raw. He's got a lot of refinement and development. But if you're looking for traits, if you're looking for a guy who could be that gunslinger type guy and is willing to push the ball into tight windows, willing to push the ball vertically down the field, Nussmeier has that in him. And number 5 right now, Quinn Ewers out of Texas. Listen, I think he started out the year red hot. He got injured. We haven't seen the same thing. I think it'll be interesting to kind of see how he rounds in the form the second half of the college football season if they're in the playoffs as well. After that top 5, we're talking Carson Beck, Miller Moss, Drew Allard, Jackson Dart. Those guys kind of make out the next group of guys at the quarterback position. At the running back position, we talked before, Ashton Genty, tier to himself. I actually think the rest of the top 5 at the running back has started to been kind of hard to differentiate. I still have a Marion Hampton there. He's been there since before the season started as my number 2 back. I have Quinshon Judkins at number 3, Ollie Gordon at number 4 from Oklahoma State, and then Travion Henderson out of Ohio State at number 5. Judkins and Henderson have not had great years. So listen, I still think they're very talented, but they have not had the years I think we expected going in. So I think it's opened up the door a little bit for maybe some other people to emerge, whether that's a Caleb Johnson out of Iowa or Nicholas Singleton out of Penn State, who sit there at number 6 and number 9 on my big board at the running back position. Woody Marks, who sits there at number 10 for me. Those are the names that I think are now potentially in the mix to maybe leapfrog into the top 5. But that's something that I think the pre-draft process, the rest of the season will kind of put itself out. But to me, it's Ashton Genty round 1. I'm not sure we definitively have anybody else round 2. I think Omarion Hampton's got a chance. I think some of these other guys got a chance. But I also wouldn't be surprised if some of these guys fell to round 3 after we have Genty, maybe Hampton at the top of the second or mid-second. And then I could see a bunch of guys going in the 3rd round as well. And Caleb Johnson, Woody Marks are the names to keep a close eye on as well. At the wide receiver position, I kind of alluded to it before. Travis Hunter is now my wide receiver 1 in the 2025 NFL draft. We'll see if that's going to be his position that goes on record. There's a lot of up in the air, but in terms of his all-around play, the ball skills, the body control, the hand-eye coordination, the athleticism, the yak ability, the route running. There's so much to like about his game. I have Travis Hunter 1. I have Tet McMillan 2 out of Arizona, Luther Burden 3 out of Missouri, Emeka Egbuka out of Ohio State 4, and Isaiah Bond 5 out of Texas. Luther Burden, Missouri's offense has really been very stagnant over the last month or so we haven't seen much production from Luther Burden. But there's still a lot to like about his game. I think Egbuka has been coming on strong, and Isaiah Bond with that X factor, the speed, I think is going to still be intrigue teams in round 1. And then at the tight end position, we've kind of talked about that over the last couple of weeks. I still have Colston Loveland at number 1 out of Michigan. I think, the offense there he's been playing on has kind of really not done him any favors, and he's still produced and put up numbers. Tyler Warren, though, right on his heels. For me, it's a 1A, 1B thing. I think Loveland has a chance to go round 1. I think Tyler Warren is more of an early round 2. They could both go early round 2. Maybe Warren could sneak his way into round 1, but I think Warren's like a top 50 guy. I think Loveland could go late round 1 or early round 2. They're my 1-2. Mason Taylor, I think, is definitely a day 2 player as well out of LSU. Those are the 3 guys that I think are locked in, top 75 or top 100 picks, depending on where Mason Taylor goes. I think after that, it's still very much up in air. I have Jake Brinstool out of Clemson, very much a athletic pass catching tight end as my number 4. And then to me, you can go Harold Fannin Jr. out of Bowling Green, but his size is really going to impact people. You still have Oscar Delp. Could he make some noise down the stretch run for Georgia? Does he even declare? You got Oronde Gadsden II out of Syracuse, but he's more of a wide receiver. You got Bryson Nesbitt out of North Carolina. He's more of a wide receiver frame. So there's a lot of things there. I brought up guys like Caden Prescourt. So to me, it's a clear top 3. And then very much up in the air in terms of that tight end position. I have Bryn still there and still Oscar Delp there, but I think Harold Fannin Jr. could have something to say about it. Gadsden, Nesbitt, if you're really looking for those pass catching only types. And we'll see if anybody else can kind of push their way into the mix. In terms of the Devy report, only one name I wanted to kind of talk about in the Devy slant report for this week, and that's Jeremiah Love. We've talked about him before, but what he's been doing for Notre Dame been really impressive. I think he's one of those guys where you're gonna see him rising up Devy boards as one of the top running back underclassmen, non-draft eligible running back prospects in college football. A lot to like about Love's all around game. Big playability, can carry a heavy workload, and we've been seeing it week in and week out for Notre Dame this year. So Jeremiah Love is a guy I wanted to give a little love to in the Devy Slant report for this week. Let's kind of spin our attention now to the Sunday aspect of Saturday Sunday, and let's talk about the NFL rookie report for week 8 of the college football season. Seems like there's always so much to talk about in terms of the rookies from last year's draft class. at the quarterback position. First thing we got to talk about is Drake May, leaving the game, concussion. We'll see when he's back on the field, but obviously he's really been impressive, with a really weak supporting cast around him. Good for New England to pull off that comeback victory, which Kobe Brissett in there over the Jets yesterday. But I'm excited to watch Drake May the rest of the year because there's going to be some ups and downs, but there's a lot to like about Drake May and what we've seen in the early going this year in terms of once he got onto the football field. And like I said, I think as they build that team there, whether, they'll go out in the offseason and try to get him a wide receiver one or draft one at the top of the draft, they'll get him playmakers. They'll bring in guys there. They'll try to fortify that offensive line, maybe with some free agent signings. I think Drake May could quickly ascend into a very viable quarterback for fantasy and a very top end type quarterback prospect that can rise a team up in terms of their NFL success as well. That's how much I believe in Drake May. We had the Caleb Williams versus Jaden Daniels matchup. Obviously, the ending was unbelievable with the Hail Mary play by Jaden Daniels. I don't know what more to say about Jaden Daniels. The creativity, the buying time, the arm talent. You saw it all in that one play. Obviously, a little fluky and got lucky. Hit Chicago defender knocking the ball up in the air right into the hands of a Commanders receiver for the victory. But nonetheless, Jaden Daniels, it was concerned he might not play due to the injury the week before. He guts it out. He plays and leads his team to victory with that amazing play as well. And then, in that same game, obviously, Caleb Williams looked really poor in this game, 10 of 24, only 131 yards. Listen, we talked about it. We had some poor games from Caleb early on. We had some really good games. And then this was a poor game against an improving Commanders defense. But I think you're going to see this. We're not going to see these young quarterbacks be consistently good, in their first year. That's just not practical. So I think it's one of those things where we're going to live with the good and the bad as they, progress through their season this year. And then Bo Nix, right? I've knocked him a lot on how bad he looked earlier in the year. We got to give him credit though. Obviously they were playing Carolina, but take that out of it. Even though they were 28 of 37, 284 yards, 3 passing touchdowns, added a rushing touchdown. He's been improving week to week. He's starting to look more comfortable and as a fit in that, Sean Payton offense, which we talked about on draft weekend, that it was one of the best fits in terms of fit and player. I still thought he was overdrafted early in the year. It seemed that way. I still think he was, and he's not going to be a big time elevator, but right now he's been playing well the last couple of weeks. Denver's been winning. That is great to see. I hope Bo Nix very successful. We want young players to be successful, whether our takes are right or wrong. I'd much rather be wrong on a take and a player be successful. We want these young players to be successful. So hopefully Bo Nix keeps this going for sure. Other rookies to talk about in terms of the NFL rookie report. Keon Coleman, 5 catches, 70 yards, and a touchdown this week. Starting to build more chemistry with Josh Allen. Great to see. Week in and week out. Now with Amari Cooper there, you have Cooper, you have Shakir. Coleman's a nice third piece there. They all complement each other very well. They're all different types of players, different roles. So it was nice to see Coleman. I think he's going to have a pretty strong finish to the year and be an interesting guy in the dynasty circles. Xavier Legette caught a touchdown from Bryce Young, 4 catches, 34 yards. Very interested. I would still be trying to buy low on Xavier Legette. People might be a little down that Bryce Young's back in there right now. I think Deontay Johnson's going to be traded. So I think that Legette's really going to get a chance to emerge down the stretch this year, even with Bryce Young in at quarterback. I think the time is to get him right now when Deontay Johnson is still on the roster. And if you like his game and you believe in him, be aggressive now, because I think once Deontay Johnson gets traded, I think Legette's value goes up, his production goes up. It's going to be much harder to get him during the stretch run of this year or in the offseason if Deontay Johnson gets moved. Ladd McConkey, 6 catches, 111 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Really starting to see Ladd develop here into a big-time player. We know he's great route runner, can win inside, can win outside. They don't have a lot there in that Charger offense. So really impressive to see Ladd McConkey developing that rapport with Justin Herbert, becoming one of his go-to targets there. Really impressive stuff from McConkey. I think It's going to be hard to buy him now, but because people still look at that Charger offense, they're maybe down overall on it. Maybe you could still be a little aggressive and get him for a late first round pick or an early second round pick. I think that's going to be worth it. I think he's going to be as talented as the guys probably going early second round or late first round in next year's rookie drafts. I think he could easily be a 90 catch, 100, 1,100 yard, 6 touchdown type player, if we continue to see this from him. And then Ricky Pearsall, obviously just kind of getting going over the last couple of weeks, but I think he's an interesting buy low now, especially with Brandon Ayuk out, gone for the season. He's going to get opportunities. We don't know what next year brings. Ayuk coming back from a major injury, older than we think. Can they afford Debo with Ayuk's contract, with Purdy's contract coming in the wings? I think Pearsall's a really interesting guy to try to buy right now as well. And then let's spin this over to the Fantasy Dynasty Report for this week as well. And then let's start the quarterback position, because I think there's some interesting guys to kind of talk about. We talked about him a lot lately, Anthony Richardson, but I don't think I really went into right now. He's just not getting a lot of work near the goal line, right? What makes Jalen Hurts an elite fantasy player is the push tush touchdowns, but also running near the goal line. We're not seeing it from Anthony Richardson. I think it was CBS podcast, great podcast. Have had a couple guys on there on a regular basis here at Saturday, Sunday. Listen to their podcast one day driving into work. They were talking about just how many carries Anthony Richardson is ceding to Jonathan Taylor inside the 5, inside the 3-yard line. And I think that is really where Anthony Richardson's fantasy value has really been poor, because he's just not getting those easy touchdowns, right? When they were running him last year, he was a big time weapon near the goal line. That's kind of where Anthony Richardson's got to be. It was nice to see him run a little bit a couple of weeks ago, but those short yardage touchdowns, right? When you draft Anthony Richardson, you're almost banking on 8 rushing touchdowns, maybe 10 rushing touchdowns. Like, that's in the realm of possibility when you look at a guy like Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen. We're just not seeing it. They're handing the ball off to Jonathan Taylor. Maybe they're concerned about Anthony Richardson, staying healthy. He's been hurt a couple times on some short yardage runs inside of the 10-yard line. But if he doesn't start doing that, it's going to be really hard to see him be a major fantasy weapon, because there's still development needed in terms of his passing. So that aspect of Anthony Richardson really does have to materialize for, I think, him to hit his ceiling. Tua is back. As soon as Tua is back, obviously the concern will always be what happens if he gets one more hit, bad concussion. But when he's back, everything around that Miami offense just rises, right? Tua is probably like an early QB2. But when he's there, everything's better in that Miami offense, including the running game. So it was good to see him back. Very hard to evaluate Tua for Dynasty, because, I know I traded for him last offseason, and now it's like, okay, what is his value? Should I try to get out when I can? Because, is one more hit the end of his career? Like, we don't want to think that, but it's possible more with him than any other player probably in the sport. So it's an interesting discussion to kind of, I kind of see if there was a scenario where I could that made sense. I think if I was a Tua owner, I would pull the trigger. Jalen Hurts with A.J. Brown, I mean, Philly's rolling right now, and they have a great schedule coming up. But when you see Jalen Hurts with A.J. Brown, he is an elite fantasy quarterback, because A.J. Brown brings the best out of him in terms of his passing production and his passing stats, and then still get a better offense, produces more opportunities near the goal line for Jalen Hurts to run in touchdowns as well. And then 2 guys who have been long forgotten until recently, before the year started, had basically no dynasty value. And now here we are, Sam Darnold. I think the question is, what does his value look like in 2 quarterback leagues? Is this a guy that, like, people should be buying? Yes, we know they drafted JJ McCarthy, but the question is, I either think if Minnesota continues to play well and Darnold continues to play well, they might be forced into franchising him and seeing what happens next year. They might be forced to franchise tag and trade him to a team that wants him to be their starter. And if he does hit free agency, he's probably going to get $40 to $50 million on the open market to be somebody's starter. It's hard to envision a scenario where Sam Darnold is not a starter next year, and that makes him very intriguing. Some people might still be very reluctant or resistant because of the name, but I think that gives an opportunity for maybe you can get him on the cheap, and hope that you have a starter next year at the quarterback position in a, a 2 quarterback or super flex league. And then Jameis Winston, I think the same conversation could be had. There are too many bad starting quarterback situations. And I know Jameis Winston is a roller coaster, but he went in this week, took that Cleveland offense that has been basically pathetic with Deshaun Watson at the helm, threw for 334 yards and 3 touchdowns against the Baltimore Ravens and beat the Baltimore Ravens. I know it's going to come with the good and the bad, but I think if he plays as well as I think he's going to play and put up the stats I think he's going to put up, I think Winston's a guy who might get an opportunity next year, whether he's a bridge guy, whether teams decide to hold off and not take a quarterback in the 2025 NFL draft, waiting to the following year and, a better draft, with Nico and Arch and stuff like that the following year. I think there's a real possibility Jameis Winston gets a chance to be a starter somewhere next year. So if you can get him on your team now, you get a guy who I think is going to be the starter the rest of this year. And I think there's a possibility he's a starter next year as well. So I think that is a very interesting scenario where, you could look at him now and possibly get something from him this year and potentially the year after as well. At the running back position, Joe Mixon, I haven't talked about him. He's not slowing down. He looks better now than he ever has in most of his career in Cincinnati. Cincinnati maybe didn't put him in the best situation, the best run scheme, but right now in this Houston offense, I think you almost got to start looking at Joe Mixon and saying, I know he's 27 years old, had a decent amount of wear and tear, but I think he's a guy where you got to look at him and say, you know what, for 2 years, the rest of this year and all of next year, he might be a rock solid RB1. And he was just not being valued that way in dynasty circles before the season started. And now I think he's got to be elevated a little bit in dynasty circles, especially when you talk about the running back position is so hit or miss week to week, season to season, month to month, that I think Joe Mixon is locked in there. If he could stay healthy, I think you're talking about a guy who could be an RB1 the rest of this year. I think right now he's in the mix every week right now to be the RB1 overall. So definitely RB1 the rest of this year in terms of top 12. And I think very likely that if he doesn't show much regression the rest of this year, he'll go into next year being a top 12 running back at the position as well. That's valuable in Dynasty to have a guy who could give you 2 years of RB1 production, and then we'll see what happens after that. At the tight end position, Kyle Pitts looking better than he has since his rookie year, growing some chemistry there with Kirk Cousins. Love to see it back into the mix, maybe in terms of top 5 at the dynasty tight end position, especially with so much uncertainty with Laporta and Dalton Kincaid and everything else. So good to see that. And then Cade Otton, I mean, nothing but stock up on him. I know right now Tampa Bay is down receivers, but he's looking really good in his opportunity that even when Mike Evans comes back, Chris Godwin out the rest of the year, I think Cade Otton is developing himself into a guy who should be considered a clear tight end 1 in fantasy for the rest of this year, and maybe potentially moving forward as a guy who could be a low tight end 1, heavy volume in terms of how many snaps he plays, a lot of opportunity there, and he's shown that he could be a pretty solid producer at that position. If you're on the field most of the snaps, you're going to fall into production at the tight end position, and very easy to be a tight end 1 down there. And he's looked good. So I think stock up on Cade Otton. And at the wide receiver position, Christian Kirk, who's been kind of on the stock down multiple times on this list, I think right now his value is at an all-time low with a season-ending injury, uncertainty. They were looking to maybe trade him, which maybe could have saved some value. Now a lot of uncertainty. Is he a cut candidate after the year? Do they trade him for like a late day 3 pick? I think the Christian Kirk injury could not have came at a worse time, really torpedoing his dynasty value right now without the hope of a trade. So that's unfortunate to see. Amon-Ra St. Brown, is he still a top 6 or 7 dynasty wide receiver? I think it's a legitimate question. We have a lot of great young wide receivers. That Lions offense is just spreading it out. Once Jameson Williams gets back from suspension, it was only 2-game suspension. He started to come on this year. Sam Laporta hasn't even been a heavy part of that offense. If that starts to turn, what does it leave in terms of target share for Amon-Ra St. Brown? He's still going to be their leading target getter, but is he going to be that guy who clearly is far and away the leader on their team? Because he's a guy that does he's not a big play guy, right? He'll have a couple plays here or there, but he's a guy that needs volume. He's a guy that's got to catch 7 passes for 75 yards, 80 yards. That's where his kind of bread and butter lives. You're not going to see a ton of 30-yard plays from Amon-Ra St. Brown. So listen, he's still a clear top 8, top 10 dynasty wide receiver, but before the season started, some people might have said top 5 overall, right? And now I think, with the emergence of Malik Neighbors and with some other guys emerging, I think the question becomes is, if this is the up and down that we see the rest of the year, where does he kind of go heading into the offseason? Stock up on Khalil Shakir. I talked about Keon Coleman before. I think Shakir now with Amari Cooper and really starting to hit his stride. Besides the game he missed with injury and one that he came back from his injury, he's been a solid producer. And now we're starting to even see some more spiked weeks from him. I think that's a guy that could have solid wide receiver 4-ish value for dynasty leagues. We know that Bill's offense and Josh Allen in particular really likes targeting that slot guy. It's been a very productive spot in all of his career as well. So Khalil Shakir is an interesting player there. And then Cedric Tillman, obviously I mentioned Jameis Winston before. Stock up on Cedric Tillman, right? Finally getting an opportunity, seizing that opportunity. He could be a guy that is ascending the rest of this year, could morph into their clear number one wide receiver with Amari Cooper gone. Jerry Jeudy's never really performed up to his talent level. Cedric Tillman could really emerge there to be a viable dynasty asset moving forward. So there it is, guys. The NFL Draft Report, NFL Rookie Report, and Fantasy Dynasty Report for this week. If you're enjoying the content, please get over to the website, S2S Football, fastest and easiest way to get there. Check out all of our premium content under our premium notebooks. You get all of it for $9.99. Scouting notebook, rankings notebook, NFL draft projections notebook in April is the best way to support the show. We hope if you've purchased it in the past, you consider purchasing it again. And then if you've never purchased it, please consider purchasing it. It really does help us. It makes us continue to be able to do what we do here at Saturday to Sunday moving forward. So on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nakano, and myself, thank you for joining us, and we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.